It's essentially about a singer who is looking for flowers so he can gather them in his tilma so he can show them to the lords and princes. So anybody who's familiar with the Guadalupe narrative will notice the parallels there. And it really did hurt my faith because I got into all this critical scholarship, by secular scholars, and they were saying, well, obviously what's going on here is these Aztec song poems are the source material for a fabricated Guadalupe story.
Welcome to your Catholic Drive Time,
keeping you informed and inspired.
We love God, we ought to be able to talk about Him.
getting you started on your day.
With the latest in breaking news and information.
From the Vatican to the White House and everything in between.
It's serious, it's fun, it's your Catholic Drive Time.
Joining us right now is Joseph Julián González. He is an acclaimed composer whose music has graced the grand stages of Carnegie Hall and the Sydney Opera House. But today we're not here to talk about his musical brilliance. No, instead we're here to explore a groundbreaking journey that he has undertaken with his co-author and lovely wife, Monique González, a journey that dives deep into history, spirituality, and a profound revelation. I was blown away by this book. I have not been able to finish it yet, but I've gone through a few of the chapters, and it's like, it reads almost like a mystery novel because he sets it up with these questions, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. And I was kind of blown away, and I have a great devotion to Our Lady of Guadalupe, and I was learning things that I had never heard before. So good morning to you, Mr. Gonzalez.
Good morning, Adrian. How you doing?
Praise be to God. I'm good. It's good to be here. It's good to have you on. Now, Mr. Gonzalez, this was a very interesting book, and I want to start from the beginning. So initially, when I read this, I was going through and I was just taken away by this idea of going back to the Aztec language and learning what the things were happening at that time and looking at the poetry that you were sharing in the book. So let's start at the beginning. How did you get started on this project?
Well, as you said, I'm a composer, and in the early 1990s, I was inspired to set Aztec poetry to music. So I had to do a lot of research. So I was living in downtown LA. I would go to the LA Public Library, and I uncovered this one book called the Cantares Mexicanos, Songs of the Aztecs, written by a gentleman named John Bierhorst. And it contains 90 of the 180 known Aztec song poems that were collected by the Franciscan friars a few decades after the fall of the Aztec Empire in 1521. When I opened up that book and started doing a lot of studying, I looked at this first poem called the Cuica Pecayo, which is called The Origin of the Songs. And I was shocked because the narrative in there sounds almost identical to the Guadalupe narrative. It's essentially about a singer who is looking for flowers so he can gather them in his tilma so he can show them to the lords and princes. So anybody who's familiar with the Guadalupe narrative will notice the parallels there. And it really did hurt my faith because I got into all this critical scholarship, by secular scholars, and they were saying, well, obviously what's going on here is these Aztec song poems are the source material for a fabricated Guadalupe story. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is really startling. I'm Mexican American, and my grandma's name is Guadalupe, and I went to Our Lady of Guadalupe Elementary School. So I was really shocked to hear this. Anyway, it hurt my faith terribly at that time until I met my wife. She read in 2009, many years later, she read the same poem, and she was shocked and to hear about all these Aztec flower songs that mirror and in a way, seem like source material for a fabricated narrative. Anyway, but we started a 14-year odyssey where we said, we're going to get to the bottom of this. And we started going to libraries. We actually went to Mesoamerican conferences. We talked to various different people in different subjects that you would never think would apply to the Guadalupe narrative. And after a while, we came to the conclusion that the Guadalupe narrative and everything surrounding Guadalupe couldn't possibly have been made up. And we came up with an alternate theory. And it's basically that for 3,000 years, God was preparing the people of Mesoamerica, that this earlier song poems is actually evangelical preparation, and it only points in one direction: the Christian conversion, the millions of conversions that happened 10 years after the apparition of Guadalupe in 1531.
Wow. That was absolutely stunning. And when I was reading this, initially, I was thinking, okay, here's what I think. And because I hadn't read the ending of it yet, I was like, okay, I'm reading this. I'm thinking, maybe this is like if someone just read the Old Testament, not knowing it was older than the New Testament, and read it and was like, it seems like this Jesus character was made up to fulfill the prophecies in the Old Testament. That seems like what's happening here. And it seems to me that you're reading this poem, and I was thinking, it sounds like it's a prophecy about the coming of Our Lady of Guadalupe and Juan Diego. Is that kind of what you're saying here? Is that the correct interpretation? What are you thinking here?
Yeah, many people have made that comparison, that it kind of acts as an Old Testament in that it gives the context to understanding the New Testament. In fact, we're not only saying this. There was a priest who just wrote a dissertation 2 years ago. I believe he's from the Oaxaca area. He speaks fluent Nahuatl, which is the language that we're talking here, the language of the so-called Aztecs. He made the same conclusion that we made, that is essentially you can't really understand the Guadalupe narrative and everything that happened unless you understand, number one, Flower World, which we could talk about, and the Aztec song poems, because that takes us into an area called Nahuatl philosophy. Almost like a parallel could be the Greek philosophy, which really set the Greeks for conversion, because they had certain understandings that were able to create a bridge to Christianity. The same thing happened here. There's a lot of parallels going on. But if I could just give you a quick example of how it bridges over. In the earlier song poem, the singer is trying to find flowers, and flowers are a metaphor for truth. So he's trying to call down flowers from heaven so he could put them in his tilma, so we can share them with the people of earth, which is ultimate truth, which connects to ultimate beauty in this place called the Flower World Paradise. So, however, at the end of the poem, he laments because he actually doesn't go to this Flower World Paradise. He actually doesn't find the flowers. And the reason why is because he's unworthy, because he's afflicted, he's wretched, he has sin. And at the end of the poem, it says, only the God of far and near, in Nahuatl, it's Intlocanahuaque, can make one worthy to enter the Flower World Paradise. Well, now, when you come into the Guadalupe narrative, it starts with the theme of worthiness, because the first words that come out of Juan Diego's mouth when he comes to Tepeyac Hill and he sees these wondrous sights and beautiful music is he says, "Where am I? Am I worthy to be here?" He's questioning whether he could be in this Flower World Paradise. And he even says, could I be in the place that our ancient ancestors spoke of, the Flower World Paradise, or in the place of heaven? Now, why would he say that? Number one, why would he talk about worthiness if he himself didn't know about connecting Flower World Paradise to worthiness? And also, why would he say that this is the place that his ancient ancestors spoke of? There's definitely a connection to these two. So I'm just giving you one example of the way in which these ancient flower songs, this ancient knowledge, flows into the Guadalupe narrative in a very beautiful way and a convincing way that we believe, and we make the case in our book, was one of the main reasons why 9 million indigenous converted.
That is absolutely amazing. And one aspect of the book that I really liked is how well sourced it was. Massive bibliography. It's sourced like an academic book, but reads at a popular level. We're going to go to a quick break. When I come back, I want to go more into the question of how did this convert the nations? That's always kind of bothered me about how that worked. So we'll talk about that when we get back. More Catholic Drive Time. We'll see you very soon. And welcome back to Catholic Drive Time. This is your host, Adrian Fonseca. Praise be to God. It's good to be here with you today. It's always good to be here on Catholic Radio. Actually, very apropos to our conversation, we're airing across the Guadalupe Radio Network and Catholic Spirit Radio, and we're talking about Our Lady of Guadalupe. Joseph Julián González, an acclaimed composer, but more importantly to our conversation, he is the author of a book on Our Lady of Guadalupe published by Sophia Institute Press. So check that out from Sophia Institute Press, Guadalupe in the Flower World Prophecy. Now, Mr. González, before I went to a break, you were talking about an aspect of how this kind of prophecy existed and how it could be something that draws the Aztec people into the Catholic faith. And you touched on something that I have always wondered. I have never heard about the image of Our Lady Guadalupe doing miraculous things like we hear, like you think about Our Lady of Fatima healing hundreds and hundreds of people, thousands of people, miracle of the sun, dancing in the sky. It's the miracle that happened was to the bishop. Very few people actually saw the miracle. And so you have this really beautiful image. You show the Aztec people and they're all like, wow, that's a pretty image. I'm going to become Catholic. And it's kind of the way the story sounds. And it's always kind of bothered me. I'm like, that doesn't, like, if I saw that, I don't think I would convert because of seeing it. So what say you, Mr. González? How did the image of Our Lady Guadalupe in the story of Juan Diego convert the nation?
Well, you bring up so many different points. I can go in so many different directions with this. Number one, let's just talk about the conversions. When you look at the primary source that talks about how the conversions happen, that's a book that was written by Fray Toribio de Buenaventura Motolonia. He actually describes Indians or in the indigenous coming from far away, hundreds of miles away, and coming to the closest mission that were set up around Mexico City in order to, and begging to be baptized. Now, there's only, Tepeyac is actually only mentioned once in all these conversion stories. As I said, they happen in faraway places, and it leads you to believe that they were not coming from the direction of Tepeyac. So it doesn't seem as if many of them saw the image of Tepeyac. I hate to be kind of scandalous in this, but the reason why we have to deal with this issue is because secular scholars use that to beat us believers over the head. They say, well, if it was the image that converted everybody, then why don't we have more evidence of millions of people going to the shrine of Tepeyac first? Well, in our case, we believe that we resolved that historical anomaly. What we say is that the Guadalupe story would have turned into what they call a flower song, which would have been memorized. One song would have been created, and it would have gone to village and be memorized, and it would have spread, kind of like a computer meme. It would have actually been duplicated. This was their tradition. It's well documented. We're not making any of this up. It could have gone out hundreds and thousands of miles, and the people from these villages, the indigenous, would have heard it sung and performed with two different types of drums, a huehuet and a teponatzli, perhaps even with dancers. So the reason why this is important is because things were told in an emotional way. They were told through artistic mediums. So we're saying that when the people heard this, and because so many things were being fulfilled we outline in our book through prefigurement, metaphor, symbolism, and typology. Because there's so many similarities, they would have realized that something supernatural was happening, that God was speaking directly to them and was fulfilling things within their own culture that nobody could have known about. And it would have converted them on the spot. And then they would have came in droves to the nearest priest to be baptized. And boy, the counts are incredible, the way they how they sought after baptism. They wanted the flower world paradise. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, that was amazing. That's a great, concise way of putting it. And if people want a more detailed account, well, they're going to have to check out the book, Guadalupe and the Flower World Prophecy. But let's go to that title right there, the Flower World Prophecy. You've mentioned it a number of times in our conversation, but we have yet to ask about what on earth are we talking about when we say flower world. That just seems, when I hear flower world, I'm thinking 1980s hippie generation, not the 1500, 1400s Aztec civilization. So what is the flower world?
Flower world is a new field of study. It's only actually been around for the last 20, 30 years in the arenas of archaeology, anthropology, and linguists. I'll try to explain this quickly. A linguist named Jane Hill started collecting indigenous song poems from people of the Nawa, the Hopi, the Paiute, and she noticed that so many of them talk about this floral paradise afterlife. They talk about these iridescent flowers and these beautiful, beautiful landscape. And she coined this place Flower World. And what is starting to happen in these fields is that these scholars are beginning to reframe the way they think about Mesoamerican history around this hypothesis. And there's been so many discoveries that have happened just in the last few years. For example, they've discovered shafts under the famous pyramids outside of Mexico City, Teotihuacan, where underneath these pyramids, they find it goes into a 4-petaled flower type configuration. And that is talking about this thing called the Axis Mundi, where if you go to the flower, you're making a connection to divine beauty and truth. So flower world starts from the middle formative Olmec period around 1500 BC and took everything up to the when the Aztecs met the Spanish. So that's a thumbnail of Flower World, and it relates to the Guadalupe story because at the beginning I said, Juan Diego says, could I be in Xochitlalpan, in Tonacatlalpan, the flower world paradise? Well, he is making a direct reference to the flower song poems, which use the same phrase, which also then takes us back to the cradle of civilization, because it's the same concepts that are leading us back to history. So we just basically took this information and said, why isn't this God implanting concepts that led to the conversion? So we kind of hit it from a different direction and went to the encounter itself in 1531.
Wow. Oh my goodness. That is, yeah, see, I haven't got that far into the book yet. So that is very, very interesting. Wow. There's about a dozen different questions that I could bring up, but I guess I'll just have to read the book. Here's another thing that is very interesting is you talk about a unique flower, but it was only one flower that is present on the tilma that has great significance. Tell me about this.
Oh boy. Okay. So I have to talk about this thing called the Axis Mundi. Now, the Axis Mundi concept is basically when you have the 4 cardinal directions of the world, north, south, east, and west. This represents the earthly plane or the known universe. However, from the center point going up, it takes us to another dimension, which would be the heaven. It also goes down to the underworld, but it takes us up to the flower world paradise. So the Axis Mundi is a 3-dimensional model of a multi-dimensional reality. Okay, try to think of it that in that way. Now, however, what happened is that the 4 directions were represented as a 4-petaled flower. So the center point of the flower would be the connection to divine beauty, ultimate beauty that can be found in the flower world paradise. So it's very much kind of like Plato's forms, where when you, and even Benedict XVI has written about this, where when you see earthly beauty, it can wound you. And in that way, it can actually make you contemplate of divine beauty because you know that perfect beauty exists somewhere. Well, this is the same concept of the four-petaled flower. And this is really what you see all throughout Mesoamerica. It was ubiquitous. There was four-petaled flowers found in Guatemala during the Mayan period, during the Olmec period. It's all over the place. And of course, this relates to flowers being the only truth on earth, why the singer needs to gather the flowers in his tilma. Ultimately, Juan Diego finds the flowers that are the connection to divine truth. And of course, on the tilma, there is one four-petaled flower in the image of Guadalupe, and that is over her womb. So the way that we try to explain it is that when it's on a flat surface, as you can see, it's a two-dimensional image. However, if you can see it as a three-dimensional image, the center point is leading you to eternity. The center point of the flower over her womb is leading you into ultimate divine truth, which of course is Jesus Christ. So that's until you finally get to the end of the book, and we know that it's a lot to get through, but that is really the way it culminates, and we believe that that's how the indigenous would have seen it.
Yeah, that is. Every time you speak, you're blowing me away, because I thought that I knew a lot about Our Lady of Guadalupe, and I've always talked about the tilma, the symbols in the tilma, but that particular element of it, this is the first time I've ever heard that before, and it's absolutely stunning. Now, we have just about a minute left in our conversation, so instead of asking another great question about this amazing research that you've done, tell me about where people can connect with you, where can people find out more information, and on a kind of a side note, can people actually listen to the mass that you composed?
Yeah, you can. There's a SoundCloud that I have. We're creating a website, GuadalupeFlowerWorldProphecy.com. I'll post the recording. We don't have a really good recording of it, unfortunately. Maybe we can remedy that one day. But I would direct people to that website for more information. We're just putting it together right now. So over the weeks, we'll work on it. But the book can be found at Sophia Institute Press. It's also on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere else. You could find us on Facebook and Twitter, Joseph Julián González. My wife's name is Monique González. And but the book will be released November 21st. It's in pre-orders right now. The piece that I wrote, it was just performed in Mazatlan, Mexico, 3 weeks ago. So it still gets performed quite a bit. And maybe it'll come to a city near you. I don't know.
Well, but amen.
Yeah,
well, we're out of time, but thank you very much for your time, Mr. González. Guadalupe and the Flower World Prophecy. Check it out at Sophia Institute Press. God bless you. God love you, sir.